Friendships, are very difficult to cement, as you can imagine, because when you look at it, it's a bit like a celebrity in many respects. How many people can you trust? At what point does that trust get broken? And then you have to look at the bigger picture of, who do they associate with? Could that be detrimental to you? In this celebrity world, we've seen it time and time again, haven't we, where people don't necessarily think the bigger picture, They may have been snapped with someone and then a few years later down the line, yes, and I'm thinking of the Duke of York, should I say, Prince Andrew, well, was that good or wrong? Good thing, wrong thing, that's your problem, even in royal circles. But of course, to become a friend of the royals is very nice indeed. I mean, a lot of people realise that they have ladies in waiting. Well, they don't call them that now, do they? But sort of assistants. I thought that was a really nice title, didn't you? Ladies in waiting. All of these debutantes that were picked, of course, from those coming out balls famously held in the 20s, 30s, 40s and 50s. And then suddenly this was seen as, well, a little bit old-fashioned. What's old-fashioned about that? I just think it's nice things to do. But of course, one of the biggest problems, what you do find, is who you let inside the family, the nucleus of the family. And some people might say that the worst thing, as ever, we have to say allegedly, that the royal family did wasn't in fact this woman. No, she was until that point, of course, Wallis Simpson, the person that everybody said, broke the monarchy, did terrible things. And then, of course, we had Princess Margaret frolicking with younger men in Mystique in the 1970s. But even she couldn't dent the popularity of the monarchy. But this particular lady did, right? Meghan Markle. And some cite this particular moment as the worst moment, in fact, of how things started to really decombust behind the scenes. As ever, let me explain. Morning, welcome to a brand new by royal appointment. It's nice to have your company. Thank you first and foremost for supporting the previous royal appointments. I'm glad you like the longer forms. It gives me something to get my teeth into and to look into things for you on a deeper scale, because as I said, when you're doing royal reporting, it's fascinating, but it's a machine, you go out with certain things and you see certain things, you get invited to some wonderful stuff, exhibitions, all that sort of stuff. But of course, there is this sort of feeling where you have to be careful because you don't want to offend anybody. People talk like Prince Harry said, oh, it's an inner deal with the media. Absolute rubbish. It's just about being respectful. I wouldn't want to upset you as much as you wouldn't want to upset me. So why write nasty things or say nasty things? But of course, once they come out in the public domain, you have to be honest about it and you have to say this happened or that didn't happen or whatever. In the case of course, the story of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, right from the off, Meghan was busy, making sure that we knew who she was. Make no two ways about it. Meghan tipped off the media time and time again, particularly popping to Whole Foods with a right-on bag, getting the discount, letting her agency know what time she was going and what she was going to buy. It's ridiculous because this was her bread and butter. She could not believe her luck being snapped by the paparazzi that a few months ago had literally ignored her on all those D-lister events that she attended with. She tried to ingratiate herself with various special clubs over here, Soho House, all of that sort of stuff, other well-connected friends. But she was using them along the way. And as I've said to you before, I don't personally have a problem with that. I wouldn't do it personally, but I understand why celebrities do that. Celebrities have done that for years, Connect me with somebody, I'll get on with you. Meghan was simply no different. A desperate D-list actress who basically was wanting the limelight so badly, she was prepared to even look at reality shows like Made in Chelsea, or in fact, trying to get a stint on our own British version of Strictly Come Dancing. Then she hit the jackpot with, of course, Prince Harry, a man-child with mother issues, and consequently felt that he was looking for somebody who could put him in the right direction. Some suggest that he couldn't have gone in a worse direction or indeed met a worse person to do that. But of course, people like Meghan sniff vulnerability. Now, I'm not suggesting for one moment that she didn't have Harry's best interests at heart, but from the off, as we saw with the wedding, with the way she pushed everybody aside, Meghan had her own narrative, her own channel of what she wanted to do, and nobody was going to get in her way. Now, of course, by the time she'd got herself embedded into the British monarchy, according to that well-placed source, Meghan found the whole thing tedious. You know, the fact that it was so regimented, because that's the way the Queen ran it, you know, and also it's the way that most monarchs run their life. They have to. There are certain things on the calendar that are sacrosanct and you have to do it. And whether you want to or not, whether you feel ill, you know, as we've seen with the Queen, stuff like that, you carry on. But you see, she didn't want to do that. She wanted different things, according to sources. And then we saw the bullying stuff that just went on and on and on. But this really, really took the biscuit on this particular big, well, some say, very first big event for Meghan, the Royal Tour of Africa. And on that tour, they decided that they were going to make a documentary and let in that terrible media that they all disliked so much. Oh, yes. And this one along the way was none other than ITV. Harry and Meghan in Africa, an Africa adventure. And this was going to be sold around the world, and apparently profits, you know, whatever they were, parts of them are going to be donated to charity. Sure, ITV will furnish us with that detail at some point, right? But what's interesting here is the whole thing from the off was a problem. But this particular image, this one, really upset the Queen and senior members of the British monarchy. But many people believe that Meghan had planted this idea, acted it out and set it up from the off. Let me explain. The person in this particular story is none other than this man, Tom Bradby. Now Tom, right, you know, is the current main host of ITV's News at 10 flagship programme. One that's very well liked and, of course, not exactly a ratings buster, but then what news channel is anymore? You get the picture. But you see, the thing with Tom is he also has another string to his bow. He's very, very open about his own personal feelings, some of his own problems, talking about his battle with insomnia to the media at length. He's also become a very successful author and has been a very active war reporter. He comes with a big pedigree, if you like. There are certain mishaps along the way. For instance, just prior to, of course, Hugh Edwards being arrested, well, he put out this particular point of statement in an interview with Radio Times, saying that he wished, of course, the sort of rival presenter, some people might say, in the BBC, would have reached out to him because he felt he could have helped him. A rather misguided moment, but it happens to all of us, right? But the thing with Tom is, he's risen through the ranks. You see, he came from a very privileged background, whatever he likes to say, and this really helps. Consequently, you know, you make the right connections along the way, and this is imperative in this world of media, particularly if you want to report on certain things. I've noted when you do political reporting that most of the people that are very favourable to these politicians, if you dig a little bit deeper, they either went to college with them, school with them, or they have another association, a family relationship. Nothing is ever what it seems. There are one or two of us that literally just climbed up through sheer, shall we say, hard work, for want of a better word. I'm not connected in any way, which won't surprise you, chums, right? But the other side of it is there are some that work in their favour. And this really worked in the favour of Tom Bradby, because by the time he'd become their royal reporter after doing a ITN training scheme, very quickly he was invited to lunch. A very important lunch which was about to change his life. Some might say for the better, some might say for the worst. Let me explain. Soon after, of course, landing the role as the royal reporter for ITV, he was invited to lunch by none other than Mark Dyer, then Prince Harry's private secretary. And very quickly indeed, he became the favoured journalist amongst the press pack by both William and Harry. Now, over a long period of time, they both came to trust Bradby, and in 2004, he was invited to film Harry in southern Africa on his gap year. Not only that, Bradbury had the very private mobile number of Prince William, a very sort of telling point indeed. Indeed, it was a voicemail, though, that he left for Prince William, offering him to lend some television equipment for editing in 2005. And what was interesting, the details ended up in, of course, a tabloid sting, which would really sort of set off the phone hacking scandal. But William trusted Bradbury, and so much so they discussed a project over the phone, and that the contents of the conversation did pop up in the newspaper. He knew then that he hadn't been hacked or leaked, but he advised Prince William that could be the case for him, and that really was the catalyst of cementing the friendship even further. Now, it was Tom in 2010 that was given the wonderful honour of interviewing Prince William and the then Kate Middleton for their engagement interview. Now, I don't know about you, I would find this quite nerve-wracking. I'm being honest with you now, chums, because, you know, you get the feeling that Catherine was really nervous, you know, which she would be. I mean, let's be honest. But I thought she held her own very well. And, you know, they came across very well, but you could see that she was very worried about getting it wrong. Far different, of course, from William's mother, Princess Diana, who was simply too shy. And apparently the only thing Diana didn't really like about that engagement video was the blue eyeliner. She said it was so dating. And if she could change one thing, that's the thing, isn't it, ladies, right? It's always something that people don't realise that you don't like. But apparently that was it, the eyeliner. Always good to know, isn't it? But that particular interview went very well and cemented, of course, a good friendship with Tom and Prince William and Catherine. And they got on famously well, so much so that Tom and his wife were then invited to the royal wedding. And that was a spectacular event. I remember covering it and it was incredible. The atmosphere, the sheer sort of size of it was wonderful. You know, there was so much money at that point being spent. Let me tell you a little inside secret. In sort of St. James's Park, Green Park area, the channel that I was working for, NBC, literally set up a mini city, I kid you not. And they had tents and everything. And in these tents were fully working Starbucks, fully working Burger King. They had a barber there that could trim your hair. Every possible thing that you would need. It was like stepping into another world. There was so much money literally thrown at that royal wedding because they knew the power of Catherine and William and the fact that they were able to sell this around the world. Everybody was going to want to watch it. And literally millions, billions did. But you see, this was just the start of a very lucrative career for Tom. Now let me point out, I'm not blaming Tom for any of this at all. I understand how this works. This is show business and this is how it manoeuvres on. But it's the choices that you make that really make it problematic in many respects. Because what you have to remember is it's the choice of which side you go on. And eventually, in the world of celebrity or royals, there is going to be a side that you have to choose from. And some people might say that, in fact, Tom chose the wrong side. Let me explain. Not believe their luck when Tom, of course, managed to secure this documentary, the one now that became infamous, if you like, in the downfall of Harry and Meghan's time inside the British monarchy. As I told you before, you see, Meghan had already decided that she didn't like things the way that they were going. There were problems. And, you know, she and both Harry, and it has to be said, he gets lost in this particular story. But actually, he was very much instrumental in wanting to change things himself. He often thought that he could really persuade the late monarch, Her Majesty the Queen, Queen Elizabeth II, into his way of thinking. You see, people forget that he got her to do things that actually it would be said that William may have struggled with. If you remember when she got involved with the Obamas and the Invictus Games stunt, remember where they did the phone call and she said, "Oh, really?" It was very sweet, wasn't it? You could see that she felt very relaxed in his company. So in fairness to Harry, when he said things that they had a special relationship, I've been told that that truly was the case. And he thought that that would transcend now that he was married. Of course, now he's married, he wants to be sure that he mainly gets his own way, because suddenly now he's got a wife that's driving things, telling him the things that he should be having, which are equal, of course, to his elder brother. And why are they not being given the same things? You know, after all, he's more popular, is he not? You know, he's even more popular than the Queen. This was the stuff, according to a source, and as ever allegedly, that was being fed to Harry. And he was lapping it up. You have to remember, for years, he'd sort of been on the outside. Everything had been sort of about William, naturally because of their, you know, heir to the throne. That was where it was going. So by the time Meghan comes along, and they're now ultimate rock stars, which is apparently the way that Tom described them, and William and Catherine, well, suddenly he thought, this is it, we're going to get big. So the idea to film their documentary, their trip to Africa, was a clever one in many respects, because Meghan loved this idea. She liked the idea of being on camera, getting her message across, and she was, according to sources, working on that, literally directing many aspects of the whole operation, whichever way you look at it, you know. Everything was kind of, well, no, we'll film this, you know. They were very generous shall we put it nicely, ITV, in how they decided what they were going to film. There were instances that I'm sure must be still in the cutting room that could easily be found, which would verify some of the bigger problems behind the scenes. You know, the ones where courtiers and people like that, and the fact that, of course, you know, the likes of Jason North pointed out certain individuals felt they were being bullied and pushed around. You get the picture. But here's again where it gets really interesting, because not only was she controlling the whole narrative of that particular documentary, and ITV obviously can refute this, but unless they produce the entire uncut version, well, it's their story many years down the line. But this particular instance in itself was one that literally changed a massive catalyst on how people felt inside the royals about Meghan and Harry. The infamous scene, if you remember, where Meghan's standing there, hand in pockets, looking very doe-eyed, little bit of mascara on, but maybe a little bit smudged, and Tom famously says to her, well, how are you coping? You know, how are you feeling? And she says, well, I'm glad you asked, you know, because not many people have. This was the one that literally blew eyebrows off faces back inside the monarchy. And you can understand this. I mean, let's just get real here, chums. As if nobody had asked how she was getting on. The Prince of Wales, as he then was, His Majesty the King, tons of times, how are you doing? Everything all right? Anything I can help with? Fine, no problem, I've got Harry. Time and time again, this was the message that was being fed back. Now, what people don't realise, and maybe they've forgotten, is the fact that this was a very well-rehearsed speech. And the reason why it was so well-rehearsed is, and this is how it goes, you see, when you ask that sort of question, if you've got private time, you have to tell them the way of the narrative of the story. You have to say, well, we're going to go down this route. But according to the source, and Tom could come out and defy this if he likes, but apparently, you know, she was more than keen to talk about her mental health well-being, you know, how she was feeling, because nobody bothered to ask. And Harry apparently encouraged this too. Now, what happened was, of course, it wasn't just, as I said, a shock to her. She knew exactly where the camera was going to be. She knew the height of the camera, the height of the light, the top light on the camera, and exactly every single position. She knew that picture and how that will be portrayed, and how negative that will be portrayed. Of course, the one thing that Tom could have done would have been to say, well, I don't really think this is the right thing for, you know, the African trip. It doesn't necessarily fit in. But of course, he's now got paymasters at ITV. They know this is explosive and it's going to get eyeballs. So I do take the side of what he's doing. He's paid to make television, and that was sensational bombshell television in that moment. Nobody remembers the African tour. Nobody remembers, you know, anything really about that other than the other stuff that came out in due course. What people remember is the fact that he asked her that question, and that literally was the she's struggling, she couldn't cope, etc. But as I said, all of that could have changed. And according to that well-placed source, this was all driven by not just one, but two people. So why didn't it have the desired effect? Obviously, everybody then was talking about this in the trailer. Nobody really was talking about anything else. You know, this was the problem. What was Meghan's problem? Why was nobody looking after her? The initial response, if you remember, was very favourable in her light. Suddenly, somebody stepped out of line in the monarchy and said, nobody's looking after me. This was news, of course, to, as I say, everybody literally in the inner circle. Some of the terrified staff that have literally gone on record for journalists like, of course, the Times journalist who basically repeated the story in his book. Well, they had a very different sort of, shall we say, feeling of what was going on behind the scenes. The whole trip had been very difficult to deal with. Apparently, according to sources, you see, Meghan literally redirected everything. She thought this would work better, this is what we should do, didn't necessarily want to spend as long with certain individuals, felt it was tedious, boring, she'd done that, you know, that sort of stuff. Now again, you might say this is a person who's not been used to royal life, royal protocol, and what was required. Others might say you're just being ignorant and you should go along with this. This is the life that you signed up for. See, if you remember, she said she was quite happy to step away from the limelight. Even though the late Queen had said, she could continue acting in some form, whether that be voiceovers or getting involved. If you remember, she gave her one of her patronages to the National Theatre, at which Meghan turned up and did a bit of but never really to be seen again. No words of encouragement, even for fellow thespians, as it were. So you do kind of think, well, what did you want? What she wanted was the focus on her, and she managed to get it. But this really was the start of the whole, backfiring, if you like. And then what happened, and this is the thing where you find with these bombshells, what happened then was, because Tom, and apparently, as ever we have to say allegedly, had not forewarned Prince William, he saw this unfolding, as we all did on our television screens. Now, you would have thought, wouldn't you, there's a person who's been a friend a long time, invited you to their wedding and all that sort of stuff. You may have thought he may have said, a bit of uncomfortable moment coming up, and I had to ask, but just think you should be warned, etc., so that you could have had that in advance. There's no record of that. Again, I'll stand corrected if that was the case. But very quickly, very swiftly, Tom was wiped out. That was it, the end of a friendship. Now, I think that's quite sad, because obviously you've developed that friendship. You've got on, and your wives have got on, and suddenly you've thrown this away, some people might say, for a bit of sensationalism television. But that is really the world of media. Now, did he think, of course, that, things were going to go his way? The rumours are, and as ever, again, allegedly, it was Tom that helped infiltrate exactly who she would need to speak to at ITV regarding the debacle with the breakfast TV host. If you remember, he said, didn't believe anything of it, walked out of his job and was basically fired, whichever way you look at it. I told you before, that particular host came to my studio for an exclusive interview with the American television network. And he honestly could not believe, in the down moments, what had happened. He could not believe that, not because he'd been fired as such, but the fact that nobody else seemingly in that whole organisation wanted to believe his narrative or his version of events. So consequently, some people might say, not only did Tom lose out from William and Catherine's longer enduring friendship and the possibilities that could have had, but of course then he went into the political mode, into the political reporting remit. So he's still there, if you like, but where is the friendship now with Harry and Meghan? Well, it's very delicate, really, because consequently, now you have to think about this and how this would play out. Tom, as I say, is still a big name on ITV, although the channel itself is having to make dramatic cuts and less people are consuming their news from a nightly broadcast like that. Is he still friendly with Harry and Meghan? Well, according to sources, yes. But the bottom line is, some people also suggest his possible use is now simply dried up. What he was really needed for was to make sure that there was some hurt get out there for William and Catherine. Meghan really was determined to make sure that she got her message out there that what I'm saying is true. Nobody is looking out for me inside the royal circles. Of course, many people might suggest that's simply ludicrous. You've got everything at your fingertips. You could have anything you wanted, including anybody that you wanted to attend your wedding. It was your choice. But this, according to a source, was her narrative to build up the fact that the only way that they could have the life that they wanted was to escape this goldfish bowl to Canada, and then, of course, to Hollywood. And now look at how that's actually worked out. Not very well at all. And when you look at the today's situation, this could never have been the dream for Prince Harry, whatever people say. He must have wanted something totally different, because literally, when he came back from Africa, he apparently said to all concerned that he was very concerned that in fact people hadn't praised not just him, but his wife and what a terrific job they'd done out into the world's media. And that apparently was another bone of contention. All the direction, all the praise seemed to go on William or indeed Catherine. And beyond that, of course, both Harry and Meghan had decided their only way forward was to prove once and for all to the British monarchy just how popular they truly were. And could the monarchy in this new 21st century survive without them, the ultimate glorious rock stars? Where are we at now? Well, the bottom line is Tom still very much decided that he's in the camp, of course, of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Well, he would have to be, having been struck off from his friendship with Catherine and William, the Prince and Princess of Wales. Of course, he still has those contacts, and they've become incredibly useful. All more recently, of course, Tom sat down with Prince Harry to discuss his autobiography, memoir, whatever you want to call it, Spare. Now, that got a lot of criticism when he sat down and did that particular interview. You see, Harry had gone on the media rounds. He'd already done things like Stephen Colbert and Anderson Cooper for CNN. All of these are failing networks that didn't really do incredibly well to get any sales. But of course, sitting down with a one-time friend may, well, literally turn the tables. But it wasn't a rating success. And part of the problem really was, although people criticised Tom's, or shall we say, questioning, I actually understood the direction he was going. In many respects, he tried to get Harry to admit certain things, particularly the ridiculousness of the drugs that he'd allegedly taken that now apparently he hadn't taken because it's a mess with the visa. Tom went there and literally asked him and basically said, do you realise how this might look? But Harry said, this is the way it had to be. This is the way that, I wanted to tell my story. I thought out of all of the interviews that went along, he seemed to me to have more of a hard-hitting stance, but consequently, it didn't necessarily rate well. Now, they're apparently still very much in touch. And what's interesting, I find, is the way that the relationship now, particularly over here in the United Kingdom with Harry, Meghan and the channel that apparently favoured them so much, the one that's headed by Carolyn McCall, of course, of ITV. Now, what's interesting there when you look at it is this is a woman who's running a major channel but didn't know some of the skullduggery that was going on behind the scenes of big hit shows that she's apparently in charge of, like This Morning. You get the picture. More recently, apparently the scurrilous stuff that was going on with the celebrity chef, Gino D'Acampo. You see how this operates. But for now, it appears that Tom's still the number one boy and can still command, of course, allegedly around about £500,000 a year for reading the nightly news on ITV's flagship show, News at 10. And some might suggest he will remain, very useful to both Harry and Meghan as long as he's in that pivotal position. We've seen this time and time again with the ex-royals. The moment that, of course, you've either lost that power or moved on, well, then you're no longer necessarily useful. But at a great loss, what, of course, Tom and some people might say, Harry, in fact, has lost, all for this particular moment of television that was engineered, put together, and more importantly, directed, some might say even produced by Meghan Markle for a great effect. Now, the other side of the coin is, on this particular questioning, he could have simply said the one burning question, who did you speak to and who did you reach out to? Apparently there's a point in this whole debacle where Tom refers to something as escaping the poisonous palace. It's literally in black and white in print. So when you've said that, it's very hard, isn't it, for William or Catherine to look back and think, could we mend bridges? Could we forgive, move on? It's a thing that they normally do, but they feel very betrayed. And they feel betrayed not necessarily, one might suggest, with his younger brother, but with the fact that somebody, a friend, a respected journalist, was manipulated enough, or were they, in fact, just looking for ratings, fame, fortune, whatever you want to call it. But this particular moment was the moment when they decided they could no longer trust this one-time friend who'd been invited to their wedding. And more importantly, if people do believe this narrative, this version of events, as I've often said, chums, there are two sides to every story. But in Meghan's world, there's simply just one version of events. And this is now documented as a time when the royals decided to leave Meghan to flounder. And nobody was asking exactly how she was. Now you've heard both versions. Which side do you believe? Neil Sean in the very heart of London.